Okay, this video is more proof that this psychology field and psychologists in general are harmful to men. This guy, who goes by the name of neurotransmissions, says evolutionary psychology is mostly garbage. However, transmissions, psychology is mostly garbage, period. It's feminist indoctrinated, and it attacks men at every turn. This guy is going to prove exactly what I mean.
However, out of these concerns of reductionism and genetic determinism come other more distressing criticisms, including the fear that evolutionary psychology could be used to justify existing social hierarchies or promote sexist or racist or even eugenic ideas.
Well, it's feminist controlled, so it does.
I mean, I definitely encountered this when I was preparing for this video. Not only was that a big issue in early evolutionary psychology studies, but also, I can't tell you how many videos I saw that were just upsettingly vile. I mean, you might know the ones. It's like one dude recording a voiceover on a crappy mic, and the audio keeps peaking. And on screen, there's just like a slideshow of a bunch of photos with watermarks still on them. And the video has like hundreds of thousands of views.
So he's basically describing a low status man, right? Some nobody. Now watch, or I should say, listen to him contradict himself.
There is some research that shows that people who are most privileged by these interpretations of evolutionary psychology are those who are most likely to endorse it. So really we're talking about straight, rich, conservative, white men.
Really? So, okay, so this guy's a feminist. He uses their propaganda, their rhetoric. Now, did you notice in his description, he said rich? So, transmissions, are you suggesting rich men make these videos by themselves? They're a lone guy with a crappy mic. They couldn't afford a good mic, and they're rich. And they use the cheap watermark photos, right? And they get hundreds of thousands of upvotes. Really, there are hundreds of thousands of rich men who support this nobody on the internet. Okay, this is a bold-faced lie he just told. This guy is a liar. Neurotransmission, you lied outright. This isn't him being wrong-headed or not knowing what he's talking about. He's a liar. You are a liar. And so everything you claim in your video is you. This is projection. This is what you're doing. Okay? So now you've got the most important part right away. You could stop the video right here if you feel like it, but we will get into a bit the essence of psychology. Where is it? We'll start off with reductionism, right?
One of the first issues that many bring up with evolutionary psychology is that it can be reductionist. It seems very simplistic to say that there's a gene for why we like green lawns.
By the way, transmission, I agree. It is simple. My issue with reductionism is that men use it as to excuse bad behavior. They don't want to change their ways and fight for their rights and make the world a better place. So they just say it doesn't matter, right? That's the issue with reductionism.
Or why we want to be rich, or frankly, any other complex human behavior. Part of the issue is...
I'm sorry, but our behaviors aren't that complex. Like the behavior you showed shitting on other men is very simple. You want to say, I'm better than the other guys, girls, come be with me. That's a very simple behavior. A simple, pathetic male behavior.
Popularized stories of evolutionary psychology that misrepresent research in very hyperbolic or warped ways. And when you look at the actual research, you know, there are signs of this. I mean, how do you characterize those complex human traits like intelligence or gender? However, though there are...
Again, gender is very simple. It's very simple. It's just that it's only complex if you're in denial of the simple reality of it. And this guy is.
Reductionist perspectives in the field. This is not exclusive to evo-psych. I mean, many fields use simplified definitions to make simple or sweeping claims about their research. So that seems like more of an individual's approach to science rather than an inherent flaw in evolutionary psychology.
Well, to be honest, it's very simple for a person to observe reality and observe how the gender dynamics. It's very simple. Anyone can do it.
Another concern is that evolutionary psychology promotes genetic determinism. This is the belief that our genes essentially determine and control our behavior. This is another one of those criticisms that I don't find all that convincing. I would challenge you to find a serious evolutionary psychologist who believes that certain behaviors are inevitable because there's a genetic basis for them. And like I said earlier on, evolutionary psychology is primarily focused on the psychological mechanisms, not behavior itself. While a lot of evolutionary psychology research downplays the potential impact of culture and social institutions on our psychological mechanisms.
Did you not just get through saying earlier that it was men, white, rich men, and conservatives who made these videos, right? I mean, you're making bold claims. I thought there was all this diversity in human behavior, but you definitely have your types that you put hitmen into.
Mechanisms. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's really just a debate about whether you believe that culture is mostly responsible for human behavior or if our genes influence culture. However,
It's not a debate, pal. There's no debate about it. Culture comes from biology. That's a simple, observable fact. For example, why is polygamy outlawed in a lot of countries? Because men are jealous of other men getting more than one woman and them doing without. It's very simple.
out of these concerns of reductionism and genetic determinism come other more distressing criticisms, including the fear that evolutionary psychology could be used to justify existing social hierarchies or promote sexist or racist.
There's no fear of that. That's what's happening. You just did it earlier. You banged on men, right? This is what lizard-brained, animal-brained, chimpanzee-brained people like you do, right? You found your outgroup of men to shit on, and you're doing it. Even though you fit almost entirely that demographic. I don't know what you make for a living, but you probably do well for yourself. So you're bashing on your own demographic while trying to say you don't belong to your own demographic. This is typical chimp-brained behavior. Observable.
Or even eugenic ideas.
You are a dime a dozen.
I mean, I definitely encountered this when I was preparing for this video. Not only was that...
Okay, we've got to that part. Let's see. Yep, we passed that. I'll zip on ahead.
It's pretty disappointing to see that there are people in the general population and even some researchers who distort evolutionary psychology to serve their own bigoted or closed-minded or elitist perspectives.
Look who is talking. This guy must be holding up a mirror to himself as he speaks.
It's also possible to have a researcher's bias expressed in their work without them even realizing it. Now,
this lack of self-awareness is staggering.
Again, this is not unique to evolutionary psychology. Practically every area of study has bad actors who do real harm to the reputation of their field.
Yeah, most guys are male hostile. They're just like you, and they behave like you and say the same stupid lizard brain things. That's true.
Or, they have misrepresentations and overblown ideas presented by the media to the general public. And likewise, bias exists in every corner of science, whether we like to admit it or not.
You're a perfect example.
doesn't mean that it's okay. You know, we should continue to be vigilant and
Then why don't you change your behavior if you feel it's not okay?
snuff out prejudice when we're able to, or rid ourselves of that malice.
You mean like your prejudice and malice against other men? Now, you're not fooling me any. You may have picked a category of man, but it doesn't matter. Oh, by the way, pal, I know that that was a lie because I've dealt with this biological reductionism. And it's usually said by men of all races who are impoverished. They don't make enough income to bribe the girl into their lives. And that's why they get into evo-psych. So it's a bold-faced lie you told me. So your prejudiced and hostility is showing.
And even though this is not going to be the focus of my criticism, I do believe that
it's a little late for that, pal.
Is the duty of evolutionary psychologists to make their science as clear and well supported as possible, because those mistaken scientific theories lend themselves to political abuse. The way that things are framed or discussed in a research paper don't always make a clear or precise.
Well, the psychology field is taken over by Feminist, which is a hate movement, and all they do is abuse it. Any man who knows better should not go anywhere near a psychologist.
Precise transition when they're covered in news stories, so researchers really need to be sure that they're careful about how their work is presented. So, you might be asking yourself, if those aren't part of the criticisms, then what are you worried about? Well, this is the big one, folks. This is why I claim that evolutionary psychology, as it stands today, is mostly garbage. It's because evolutionary psychology takes an adaptationist approach. Now, let me explain. Earlier on, I gave a simplified version of evolution that essentially pointed to natural selection as the process that got us to where we are today.
Your behavior is proof of that, because this is female mate selection preferences. The kind of man you are is what women go for, a guy who's hostile to other men. And you represent the standard guy. You're a dime a dozen. So that adaptation you're talking about and complaining about, it's in full swing.
We adapted these advantages to address issues in our environment, and that's what's most important.
But they're not advantages to us guys. These are only advantages to the female sex. That's the issue. And that's why guys have to get out of their lizard brain thinking like you and find a better life and make the world a better place.
This is the same perspective that most evolutionary psychologists take as well. However, natural selection is only one aspect of evolution. And perhaps you'd be surprised to hear this. It's not even the biggest one. These other forces,
not where mate selection is concerned,
cause a huge amount of genetic variation and likely explain many changes in our population without selection even factoring in.
If there's this huge diversity in selection, how come you behave like almost every other guy out there? How come psychologically you are a carbon copy of the next loser?
Now, I got nothing against Darwin, but evolutionary biology has come a long way over the last 150 years. I mean, even over the last 40 years.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't see any big sweep.
And it's identified.
I don't see any big leap, I should say.
A wide range of non-adaptive mechanisms that greatly influence genetic evolution. These have nothing to do with fitness, okay? Fitness.
I agree. This is where he's got it right. Women select for themselves, not their children, themselves. They select for status. And the guy could have great genetics, he could be a healthy individual, or he could have shitty genetics. He could be a sickly dwarf, but he has status, that's who she selects for, right? So there is genetic change, but the one thing that doesn't change is male psychology. Remember, again, you are the standard. You're a dime a dozen. So Adaptation, that is female mate selection, is still 100% making that way. They don't care about the health of your heart or your liver. Just, are you the kind of guy who will climb the ladders and gain wealth?
Of the individual doesn't even factor in. Some of the bigger examples of these non-adaptive mechanisms include mutation, recombination, and genetic drift. Mutation is when our DNA changes, and this can happen either because the DNA fails to copy accurately, sort of like, like a printing error, or due to external influences such as specific chemicals or radiation changing the DNA.
The thing is, if a guy is changed and it's not in the way that women don't like, they don't select him. So he doesn't pass his genes on. So it doesn't matter if there's other mechanisms to create change because they get filtered out. You do understand that, right?
Only once mutations happen can they be subject to natural selection, but they also drive genetic changes that can be passed on for no adaptive reason. Like, for example, the genetic mutation that causes...
Yeah, I agree. Like I just said, women go for status. And so if a guy who's sickly, again, gains wealth and fame, she might select him and pass on the genes. Remember, she doesn't care about the genetics of her children. This is strictly about her.
Attached or detached earlobes, right? Whether or not your earlobes are attached has nothing to do with your ability to live long enough to produce healthy offspring or make you significantly more attractive to select for or against that. Recombination is similar. At conception, the sperm and egg combine their chromosomes in a combination that is different from either parent. And during this combination process, the chromosomes break and reattach. And during this crossover, the recombination of genes adds a lot of diversity to the gene pool. This is great.
Look, dude, there are guys who describe themselves as neurodivergent. Usually they mean they're autistic to some degrees. The ladies don't want anything to do with them. So if you make a totally different man and the women don't select for him, that's his genes don't get passed on. Again, this is why you behave like a caveman. Your brain is a caveman brain. You haven't evolved a bit. Our evolution is limited to female mate selection.
Because recombination doesn't cause evolution to occur, but it results in variation that natural selection can then act upon if needed. There's also genetic drift, which is where the frequency of certain genes in the population...
Okay, enough of that. Here. Cost. This is an interesting one.
It all adds up. So if we propose willy-nilly that every part of our biology was selected for, then that implies an immense price. And there are limits to that price. I mean, there's only so much selection that a population can bear before it collapses. If we use this formula right here. Hey, this is Micah from the future. I realized that I made a mistake while I was recording, and so I wanted to make a quick amendment to explain what you see on screen. So essentially this...
Look, I think I can make it simple. I've heard this before. It was called Syrian runaway. Female mate selection finds a trait in the male it likes, and they keep selecting for that and expanding on that until it becomes so extreme that it fails. Exactly. But again, dude, it's female mate selection pushing it. And here's another thing. I would prefer that the human race fall to pieces, like go extinct, as opposed to staying the way we are now. Because right now we've got purgatory. We got purgatory for the male population. Right now, the human male, it lives like a hyena. In the hyena's groups, dynamics, every male is beneath every female on the hierarchy. And I don't want to live that animal life. Apparently you do, because you attacked other males. right? You're lizard-brained, and I'm an evolved brain. It's that simple. I want to change things for the better. So let's see if there's anything else we need to speak about. All right, this one last section right here.
Well, let me ask you this. What's been your exposure to evo psych? I mean, maybe you've got some friends who post articles on like Facebook or something talking about the evolutionary explanation for why we're aggressive or for crime. Or perhaps you read a book. You know, there are many out there that claim like how to find your perfect partner, or they explain why women wear high heels, or they tell you the reasons behind what makes us so politically divided.
Yeah, notice there's a lot about mate selection, isn't there? How to get with the girl, right? What makes them tick. And you're mentioning them, so it's on your brain too. It's on your lizard animal brain as well.
Or perchance you've heard that we still have caveman brains, and that
You're a perfect example of this.
That explains why we struggle with certain aspects of the modern world. When I was young, I remember seeing news stories using evolutionary psychology to explain that rape is natural and that it's inevitable that men want to cheat in relationships.
Well, I have a problem with this. One is those two don't belong together. Rape is very, very rare. It doesn't happen in the animal kingdom, right? Do lions rape the lionesses? No, they fight with one another to be selected. So that's what's actually going on, right? But as for the cheating, all of us, including you lizard brain person, want a harem. I know what's in me. I want lots of choice. And so do you. You want a diverse group of women. You want a harem of women, just like the rest of us do. So one is very common and the other isn't.
Man, we're getting into some uncomfortable territory. There are a fair number of people who take issue with hyped up or overstated claims such as these, including, to their credit, most evolutionary.
Well, I want to end off with saying this. When it comes to rape, since you brought it up, they say it's natural, but it's natural in the same way that deformities are. Like albinism. It does happen. There are albino tigers out there, right? So it does happen. But it's rare. It's a divergence from the norm, right? And that's how I see that. So you're comparing one thing that's very rare, which is very common. Men wanting a large pool of women to choose from, right? So they don't belong together in these. Anyway, that's as far as we need to go with this guy. I proved that this guy told an outright lie. This guy is a liar, period. And your motivation to lie, like you just did, was that you want to attack other men and say you're the one good guy and get in the graces to women. It's a very chimpanzee, animalistic brain thing to do. I want us to push past that. I don't want to be a bunch of hyenas where I'm beneath every other woman, or I should say every woman, simply because I'm born a man. I want to defeat sexism. You are for it. And again, this is why I don't want men to, deal with psychologists. The psychology field is harmful to men and should be voided like the plague. You are a perfect example of this. Goodbye, everyone.